When I was 21 years old, starting out as an assistant engineer, I luckily ended up with my first engineering job for Frank Zappa.
I was involved in the beginning of a career of a guy named Prince.
We had to switch studios to the record plant, and Frank wanted to work there because they had API consoles, and he really liked the sound of API consoles.
We used Sunset Sound Studio C exclusively. It had a DiMedio modified API board, and we just fell in love with it. I mean, we could do, you couldn't, I mean, you can twist those knobs and it sounds great. I mean, you can twist them all the way up and it sounds even better. And that was just such a warm and thick sounding board that we fell in love with it.
It was a live recording with Ella Fitzgerald, her trio, so this is 1977. And through the course of the evening, it was a wonderful concert, and we ended up recording a piece of history. She knew that Stevie Wonder was in the audience, brought Stevie up, and they together sang You Are the Sunshine of My Life.
I've done a lot of records in that room and in those rooms on API consoles, and I would say the biggest records I've ever done and the best records I've ever done would have been on API consoles.
The chief engineer, who was off on another site doing a different recording, said to me, I want you to take this stereo compressor, and put it across the bus. He said, this is too important a recording for you to really screw up. And I said, okay, I wouldn't normally do that, but he said, no, I want you to use this. This will still sound fine. I'll set it up and I'll tweak it and I'll make it just sound right. And it was that a stereo pair of the API, the original API compressor.
I was involved with Earth, Wind & Fire with one of the recordings of their albums, and being a bass player, I had the wonderful chance to play bass on one of the tracks, and I remember hearing the engineer plugging my bass in, and then suddenly the sound became beautiful, and I asked him how he was getting such a great sound, and he said he was using an API EQ and compression on the sound, and instantly I was in love with that sound.
A record plant used to have the scoring stage over on Paramount, and I think the first time my experience with those mic pre's was working with Dan Wallen on the scoring stage over there. I think it was like Star Trek 1.
When I first came to Record Plant, Bruce Springsteen was in Studio B working on API. We had an API upstairs, and to be honest with you, it's all I knew.
I remember the first time I popped the EQ in on a bass drum thinking like, wow, some pretty healthy low end on this console.
It wasn't until later on in my career that I started working in other studios and was sitting in front of another console and realizing that when you bring the fader up, it doesn't automatically sound good.
I was even a little reluctant to push the EQ too much because I remember like one click, 2 dB at 50 cycles felt pretty substantial.
I can always make it eventually sound good, but you have to work at it, whereas with an API, it has a sound all to itself.
Needless to say, we stayed at Record Plant as long as we could and finished up a lot of the record there on the API.
We used it on the strings, brass, woodwinds, everything, and especially on the overall mics. God, what a difference. It just opened the whole thing up. It was amazing. It was like taking a towel off the microphones. It was the most amazing sound.